Welcome back, HW100 students, to part 2 on chapter 4, carbohydrates. Picking back up our conversation on dietary fiber. Where we left off, we were saying how the chemical structure of dietary fiber is such that we are not able to break apart the bonds between the glucose molecules. So you might be wondering then, what value is fiber? Well, we're going to discuss that here in a moment. The terms that I want you to remember as it relates to fiber are soluble and insoluble, sometimes also referred to as viscous or non-viscous. And really, this is just a way of classifying the fiber, these types of fiber, based upon the actions they have within the gastrointestinal tract. And so we'll learn that these two types of fiber actually work in an antagonistic fashion and have their actions in different parts of the GI tract. So let's talk about soluble fiber. It's known as soluble fiber because it has the ability to dissolve in water, and in doing so it forms a rather viscous gel-like substance. And I want you to think of or imagine, say, hair gel. If you took some hair gel, squeezed a blob of it into your hand, you would notice that you could hold your hand up and it would not move very quickly, right? Gels move slowly. And so when we eat these foods that contain soluble fiber, those foods we'll learn about in a moment, they dissolve in the water of the gastrointestinal tract and they form this gel, and they end up causing the food mass, the chyme, to move slowly through the stomach and small intestine. And that helps to increase this sense of satiety, this sense of fullness. If you have more sense of fullness with your food consumption, then ideally it would help you to eat less. So that has an important implication on the amount of food and calories you ingest, and it could help one to decrease their food intake if they choose more high fiber foods. Again, this slow-moving gel will cause a lowering and a slowing of release of glucose from other components in the meal. And this has an important implication and benefit for people with diabetes who usually or can experience high levels of blood glucose. So it's advantageous for them to eat foods that are high in soluble fiber. And then lastly, think of that hair gel. We use it, we put it in our hair because it's sticky, right? And we can style our hair, do different things with it because of the sticky nature of the gel. Well, in that way, this gel that forms in our digestive tract, it actually adheres to molecules of cholesterol in the digestive tract that then get excreted from the body. And in doing so, we can lower our risk for heart disease by lowering our blood cholesterol. So eating foods, as you see here, the fleshy portion of many fruits, berries, oats, barley, and beans, kidney beans, black beans, red beans, etc., we're getting in a lot of soluble fiber. And the benefits are threefold. Helps us to feel fuller, which can help us to eat less. Helps to better stabilize our blood sugar levels. And thirdly, lower our blood cholesterol, and thus reducing our risk for heart attack and other cardiovascular disease. So these foods are rich in soluble fiber. Let's talk about the other type of fiber, that is insoluble fiber. Being insoluble, they do not dissolve in water. So they're not going to form a viscous gel. And in fact, they would arrive in the large intestine, and they would help to accumulate there and increase basically fecal mass and stool matter. And what I always liken them to is a broom that helps to sweep the waste out of our colon. And in doing so, that can alleviate constipation. By doing that, it can lower one's risk for diverticulosis, which is the formation of pockets in the colon in which fecal matter, nuts, seeds, and other food particles can become lodged, trapped, and later infected. So insoluble fiber, foods that are rich in insoluble fiber include all of our, for the most part, whole grain foods other than oats and barley. That would be things like wheat, rye, brown rice, spelt, quinoa. Any nuts and seeds, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, sunflower seeds, vegetables like broccoli, spinach, etc. And then the edible portion, edible skin portion of a fruit. So something like an apple is actually going to be a good source of both types of fibers, because you would hopefully eat the skin, rich in insoluble fiber, and then also the inner flesher portion, which is a high in soluble fiber. And here we see an example of these different types of fiber and where they're found within fruits and, in this case, a grain. Oh, skip over that. Okay, so whole grains. Where do whole grains fit into this conversation? We always hear that Americans are urged to consume more whole grains. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans says we should make half our grains whole. As you can see here, currently we're only making about 15% of the grain selections we make on a daily basis as whole grain. So we have a long way to go in achieving even that benchmark of 50%. One thing that's making it hard to achieve this benchmark is that it's very difficult to for the basic consumer and layperson to identify what constitutes a whole grain and just how much whole grain may be in a food. And one thing that you can do to better educate yourself when you're doing your food shopping is to look for this stamp, which is on many grain-based foods, and it tells you exactly how many grams are in that serving. So whenever you pick up, say, for example, a bread, a cereal, a cracker box, look for this stamp that tells you how many grams there are of whole grain. And ideally, the food product should have at least half of its ingredients as being whole grain on a per serving basis. So for example, if we were looking at a box of cereal and a serving size was 30 grams, if it had 16 grams of whole grain in that serving, that's more than 50%, so that would be ideal. Obviously, the closer you are to 100% whole grain, the better. Let's switch gears now and talk about added sugar consumption in the U.S. This is the most recent data available from the CDC, came out this past summer. It shows that males between the ages of 20 to 39 and males 40 to 59 are the demographic in our country that have the highest sugar consumption, and that's followed by females ages 20 to 39 and then females 40 to 59. So it looks like maybe contrary to common perception, it looks like males are the one that have the sweet tooth addiction. This is important. I also want to point out because this 397 represents the number of kilocalories, which if we divide by 4 kilocalories per gram means that males ages 20 to 39 average about 100 grams of added sugar per day. About 100 grams of added sugar today. That would be the equivalent of 2.5 cans of regularly sweetened soda. Coke, Pepsi, they have about 40 or so grams per 12-ounce servings. So if we were to boil it down, it would be 2.5 of those cans. Pretty startling figures. Let's skip over here to aspartame. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener, or as the text refers to it, an alternative sweetener. Notice that it is 200 times sweeter than sucrose. Sucrose, again, is table sugar. Many people will seek out these artificially sweetened food products or use artificial sweeteners in place of table sugar. And I don't, as a nutritionist, I do not condone their usage, because my discovery is, and my experience has been, that people who use these essentially are fueling their desire for more sweet tasting foods. So ultimately, while they may save themselves a few calories, they find that they just want and desire more sweets. So that doesn't really help them at the end of the day. One of the other now more popular artificial sweeteners is known as sucralose, under the trade name of Splenda. 600 times sweeter than sucrose alone. Very similar to the sucrose molecule, with the exception that it has these chlorine molecules added to sucrose, which to me is very interesting. Chlorine I always associate with that substance we put into pool water to kill microbes and bacteria, and yet people may be consuming this very substance. Typically we try to avoid drinking pool water, right? But sucralose contains this chlorine. It's a heat-stable molecule, which makes or lends itself better for the baking of sugar sweetened, or as a substitute for sugar within sweetened baked goods. And because it doesn't get metabolized by the body, it ultimately gets excreted. Here again, another artificial or alternative sweetener that I do not condone usage of, because of the several hundredfold times sweeter it is than sucrose. Well, we'll have enough time here to talk about high fructose corn syrup. This is probably the most controversial sweetener in American history. Introduced in the mid-70s. It's chemically produced. It is, actually there are several different varieties of high fructose corn syrup that exist, but the most common one is roughly 55% fructose. So to really call it high fructose corn syrup, it's almost a misnomer. High fructose corn syrup is ubiquitous throughout the food supply within processed foods. And the reason why it was introduced was threefold. One, it's cheaper than sucrose. And when we say cheaper, it's really on the order of hundreds of pennies cheaper. But when you use it to replace the sucrose in so many foods, it does end up saving food manufacturers on their bottom line. Secondly, it also resists oxidation, rancidity. It just doesn't go bad as quickly as good old sucrose or table sugar does. So there again, that's more potential savings from the food manufacturer's perspective. And thirdly, because it is in a syrup form, kind of a semi-liquid, it really is very practical to use in a wide range of different products, namely sodas, things like jams and jellies, condiments. Those are products that have a semi-liquid-like consistency themselves, if not liquid, and so the syrup works better than using a crystallized sugar product. So notice these three main reasons why it was introduced all pertain to benefiting the manufacturer, not human health. Now the big controversy with high fructose corn syrup is that since its introduction into the U.S. food supply in the mid-70s, we see that the rise in high fructose corn syrup over the years correlates nicely with this rise in obesity over that same time span. And so it's very attractive to want to attribute the increase in obesity to high fructose corn syrup. Well, we know that this data is correlational in nature, and correlation does not equal causation. More likely, it's a fact that in the United States, we are consuming a wide, huge, astronomical number of sugar on a daily basis, mostly in the form of high fructose corn syrup, but it's not necessarily that high fructose corn syrup in of itself has a special way of increasing the rate of obesity, but rather that our consumption of it is just so high.